of ways in which we interact with the world. And it becomes important for us to think about how to do that. And first and foremost, what we must recognize is that we all come from a context, and that context, coming from that context, has given us a limited perspective, worldview, and paradigm about ourselves and about those who we oftentimes think are very different from ourselves. And so it becomes important for us to be conscious about how we go ahead and we become active in breaking or disrupting our bias. So the first tip that I want to give you is that you need to approach your own bias and your own context with curiosity. And what we mean by that is really looking at how you grew up, where you grew up, who instructed you, how did they instruct you about your place in the world as well as others' places in the world, and be curious about that. Question it. Did they give you everything that they could, and was that whatever they gave you, was that wanting, right? Did it fall short? And I would imagine that given the fact that they came from a context and we currently live in a different context, we might find some shortfalls even in the best of intentions. So my parents, did the best they could to raise me, but they did not have the tools to give me in recognizing how to deal with the complexities of technology, right? But they did give me some sound principles that I can draw from. And so when we think about this idea of approaching your own context, your own bias with curiosity, it really is about being introspective about the things that you learned. And are those things helpful to you in achieving goals? And if they are not, then those are probably things you want to change. The next tip is really to seek to understand the feedback that people give you regarding racism. And the example that I use is when I taught middle school. And my middle school students oftentimes would say, "Andre, your breath stinks." And so, early in my career, I would get offended by that. But later, as I became more seasoned as a teacher, I knew that there were two things that were probably going on. One, they could be using that as a distraction to get out of doing work. So now we're talking about this as opposed to focusing on our task at hand. But the second thing is that my breath actually might stink. And so what I would need to do is be introspective about that. I'd have to check. And in some cases, my breath did stink. So I popped in a mint or I got some gum. But in other ways, I recognized that they were trying to get me to be off topic. And so the question then becomes, who do I check with, right? So if I'm constantly only checking with myself, there could be times that I can't smell my own breath. So I need to rely on other people to give me feedback and check in on those things. The other part of that is important is that we have to listen to what the feedback is in order to say this is something I need to change, or this is not a concern of mine. But when we do that check and balance system, then we can actually be more productive, right? Particularly around race and racism, because many of us haven't stretched those muscles to really deal with that. And then tip 3, accept and acknowledge others' information about race and take it at face value, right? Sometimes the distance between one person's perception and reality and another's is so vast that we can't, we're like, that can't be true. Well, could that be a reality? And so, and instead of spending or wasting time in some cases trying to figure out if this is true or not, give people the benefit of the doubt, because there could be some instances where, again, my perception is so far from someone else's that actually listening to it, taking it at face value, decreases the time that I have to learn and increases the time that I can be effective in engaging with them, right? So take things at face value. And then lastly, the fourth tip that I'll give you around breaking bias is take responsibility for your own learning, right? So what you know or what you don't know, what you learned or what you didn't learn is not your fault. However, when you come to the age of accountability, you must recognize that it is your responsibility. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go into our units, but I wanted to give you these top 4 things that allow you, these 4 tips for helping you to address and break your own personal and organizational bias. And so that's it for this